The sun, a molten coin in the brassy sky, hammered down on Jacob's back. The air shimmered, blurring the line between sand and horizon. Had been a fool to think he could make it to the Black Ridge well before noon. The dust devil, a swirling demon of grit and heat, had changed all that. The wagon, or what was left of it, lay splintered and scattered across the alkali flat. The water barrels, hauled like sieves, were empty now, their precious cargo soaked into the thirsty earth. The horses, spooked but thankfully uninjured, stood nearby, their flanks heaving. Jacob ran a calloused hand over the neck of his lead mare, Bluebell, offering a silent reassurance he didn't feel himself. He cursed under his breath, a sound swallowed by the vastness. It wasn't the loss of the wagon that stung, though it was a setback. It was the deliberate nature of it. The tracks were clear. 2 riders, coming from the north, lay in wait behind a ridge. They'd waited for him, knowing he'd be alone, knowing he'd be carrying water. Jacob scanned the horizon again. Nothing but heat haze and the merciless blue of the sky. He knew who it was. Jedediah Stone and his gang. They'd been eyeing his land ever since Head filed his claim, whispering threats, trying to force him out. This was just their latest, most brazen attempt. He spat on the ground, the dust clinging to the spittle. He wouldn't be run off. Not by Stone, not by anyone. He'd worked too hard, sunk too much into that land. It was his future, his life. The horses shifted, restless. Jacob knew they wouldn't last long without water. He had to make a decision, and fast. The nearest town, Redemption, was a good 2 days' ride, even pushing the horses hard. The Black Ridge well, now inaccessible with the wagon destroyed, was closer, but he doubted Stone and his men would have left. He looked at Bluebell, her dark eyes reflecting the harsh light. Head raised her from a foal. She was strong, loyal, and knew the desert better than most men. He'd have to trust her. Jacob reached into his saddlebag and pulled out his canteen, almost empty. He took a small sip, savoring the cool liquid before it turned to dust on his tongue. He offered the last few drops to Bluebell, letting her lap it from his palm. "All right, girl," he murmured, his voice raspy. "Looks like we're walking." Jacob cinched the saddle tighter on Bluebell, a knot forming in his gut. He knew the risk. Splitting the water, already scarce, was a gamble. His wife, Sarah, God rest her soul, would have argued. She always said, "Charity begins at home, Jacob. Don't go giving away what you ain't got." He could almost hear her voice, sharp and clear, riding the wind. But Sarah wasn't here anymore, just the endless expanse of sun-baked earth and a gnawing sense of something. Duty, maybe, or just plain stubbornness. He started walking, leading Bluebell, the heavy saddle creaking with each step. The sun beat down relentlessly, turning the air thick and heavy. Hours bled together, marked only by the slow, agonizing crawl of the sun across the sky. Just as his vision started to swim, he saw it. A flicker of movement in the shade of a stunted mesquite tree. He drew his revolver, the metallic click a sharp sound in the stillness. He approached cautiously, Bluebell snorting nervously. He expected Stone, or one of his lackeys, lying in wait. What he found was something else entirely. A young Native American warrior, sprawled on the ground, his chest rising and falling in shallow, ragged breaths. A dark stain blossomed on his buckskin shirt, spreading like a malevolent flower. Comanche, maybe, or Apache. Jacob couldn't tell. Didn't matter. The man was dying. Jacob holstered his revolver. The warrior's eyes flickered open, dark and pain-filled. He tried to speak, but only a gurgling sound escaped his lips. Sarah's voice echoed in Jacob's mind. "You can't save everyone, Jacob. Some folks are just meant to." He cut the thought off. This wasn't about saving the world. This was about one man suffering. He knelt beside the warrior, ignoring the burning in his own throat. He reached for his canteen, hesitated for a split second, then uncapped it. He gently tilted the warrior's head and trickled a few precious drops of water into his parched mouth. The warrior swallowed, his eyes widening slightly. "Easy," Jacob rasped, his voice rough with thirst. "Just a little." He offered him a few more sips, watching as the color slowly returned to the warrior's face. He knew it wasn't much, but it was something. A small act of defiance against the unforgiving landscape, against the vultures circling overhead, against the inevitable. The warrior looked at Jacob, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He managed a weak smile, a ghost of gratitude. Jacob didn't speak. He just nodded, his throat too tight for words. He knew he'd likely sealed his own fate, at least prolonged it. But as he looked at the dying man, a strange sense of peace settled over him. Sarah might not have approved, but something felt right. For the first time since Head found his wagon in pieces, he felt something other than the burning thirst and the gnawing fear. He felt human. The warrior, now just a shadow against the rising sun, lay still. Jacob checked for a pulse, finding a faint, fluttering beat. Head bought him some time, maybe. But time was a luxury neither of them possessed. The eastern sky bled from indigo to a bruised purple. Then finally, a fiery orange. The air, though still heavy, held a hint of coolness before the sun fully claimed the day. Jacob knew he had to move. Stay here, and Head be a buzzard's breakfast himself. He stood, his joints protesting with a chorus of pops and creaks. He looked down at the warrior, a mixture of pity and resignation swirling within him. He couldn't carry him, couldn't offer him any real help beyond those few drops of water. Head done what he could. He turned to Bluebell, who nudged him gently, her soft muzzle against his arm. "Come on, girl," he muttered. "We got to go." He took one last look at the warrior, then started walking, leading Bluebell westward. He didn't look back. He hadn't gone more than a few yards when he heard a faint sound behind him. A rustle in the brush, the scrape of leather on rock. He stopped, his hand instinctively reaching for his revolver. He waited, listening intently. The sound came again, closer this time. Then, silence. He drew his revolver, his thumb cocking the hammer. He turned slowly, scanning the surrounding landscape. Nothing. Just the mesquite tree, the endless expanse of sand, and the rising sun. He lowered his weapon, a shiver running down his spine. He was imagining things, he told himself. The heat, the thirst, the worry, it was all getting to him. He started walking again, faster this time. He needed to put some distance between himself and that dying warrior. He needed to reach water, needed to survive. He walked for what felt like hours, the sun climbing higher and higher, turning the desert into a furnace. He glanced back, just once, but the mesquite tree was just a distant smudge on the horizon. That night, camped beneath a sliver of moon, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every rustle of the wind, every snap of a twig, sent his hand reaching for his revolver. He barely slept, his mind replaying the scene with the dying warrior over and over again. By dawn, the feeling had intensified. He saddled Bluebell quickly, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He needed to get away, to escape the oppressive feeling that clung to him like a shroud. As the first rays of sun painted the sky, he noticed something. A single feather, an eagle feather, lying on the ground near his bedroll. He hadn't seen it before. He picked it up, turning it over in his calloused hand. It was old, worn, but still beautiful. He knew what it meant. The warrior, or someone close to him, had been there. He wasn't alone. A wave of fear washed over him, followed by a strange sense of obligation. Had saved the warrior's life, or at least prolonged it. Now, he owed him something. He tucked the feather into his saddlebag, a gnawing sense of foreboding settling in his stomach. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing: his act of mercy had irrevocably changed his fate. He had an unspoken debt. The sun climbed, burning away the last vestiges of dawn. Jacob urged Bluebell onward, the feather a silent weight in his saddlebag, a tangible reminder of the unknown. He crested a low rise, expecting to see more of the endless expanse. Instead, his breath hitched in his throat. On the horizon, a dark line bisected the brassy sky. It pulsed, grew, resolving into riders. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Native Americans. Jacob reined in Bluebell, his heart hammering against his ribs. They were coming straight for him, a silent, implacable force. He could see the glint of sunlight on spear points, the fluttering of feathers, the dark, implacable faces. He knew what this was. This was the reckoning. He dismounted, his legs feeling strangely weak. He stood beside Bluebell, his hand resting on her flank, trying to project an air of calm he didn't feel. He watched them approach, his mind racing. He hadn't seen this many warriors gathered in one place since, well, never. They rode silently, their horses kicking up dust devils that danced in the morning light. As they drew closer, Jacob could make out individual faces. They were young, old, grim, determined. And at the head of the column, a figure that commanded attention. A chief, tall, broad-shouldered, his face etched with the wisdom and the scars of 100 battles. He wore a magnificent headdress of eagle feathers that cascaded down his back, almost touching the ground. His eyes, dark and piercing, were fixed on Jacob. They stopped a short distance away, the silence broken only by the snorting of horses and the creak of leather. The chief dismounted, his movements fluid and graceful despite his size. He walked towards Jacob, his gaze unwavering. Jacob stood his ground, his hand still resting on Bluebell, his fingers digging into her hide. He waited, his breath held captive in his chest. The chief stopped a few feet away, his presence radiating power and authority. He looked at Jacob for a long moment, his eyes searching, assessing. Then he spoke, his voice deep and resonant, carrying on the wind. "You gave water," he said, his words clipped and precise. "To Kai, Datui, Akau." Jacob swallowed, his throat dry. That was the warrior head found dying. He was injured, Jacob managed to say, his voice raspy. "I did what I could." The chief's eyes narrowed. "You saved his life." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. And Jacob knew with a sinking feeling that his act of mercy had just declared a war he never intended to fight. The chief's expression hardened. The fragile peace he'd hoped for shattered like glass in the desert sun. The tribe on the horizon was not here to thank him. They were here to claim a debt of a different kind entirely. He straightened his shoulders, meeting the chief's gaze. I offered a dying man water. That's all. The chief let out a short, humorless laugh that echoed across the parched landscape. Is that what you think, white man? That this is about one warrior? This is about more than Kai. He swept his hand across the horizon, encompassing the silent ranks of his people. This is about our water, our land, our survival. Jacob frowned, confusion knitting his brow. Your water? I don't understand. The chief stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. The river, the lifeblood of our people. It is poisoned. Your people did this. Your iron horse, your mines. They have turned our water black. He spat on the ground, the gesture filled with contempt. Our children are sick. Our crops wither. We are dying, just like Kai was dying. And you sit on your land, with your well, with water to spare. Jacob's gaze drifted from the chief's fierce expression to the sea of faces behind him. He saw the gaunt cheeks of the children, the hollow eyes of the women, the grim determination etched on the faces of the warriors. He finally understood. This wasn't a war party. This was a desperate plea. I didn't know, Jacob said, his voice barely a whisper. I swear, I didn't know about the river. The chief remained impassive, his expression unreadable. Ignorance is no excuse, white man. Your people make promises they do not keep. They sign treaties they break. They steal our land, poison our water, and then wonder why we fight back. He paused, his gaze hardening. We are not here for revenge. We are here for water. Our people are thirsty. Our children are dying. We will take what we need. He pointed a calloused finger towards Jacob's homestead, barely visible in the distance. Your well. It will give us what we need to survive. Unless, he paused, letting the unspoken threat hang in the air. Unless you have another solution. The weight of their desperation pressed down on Jacob, heavy and suffocating. He looked at Bluebell, her gentle eyes reflecting the morning sun. He looked at the feather tucked into his saddlebag, a reminder of the life he had saved and the lives he was now responsible for. He knew he couldn't turn them away. But his well, it was barely enough for him and his livestock. Sharing it with an entire tribe, it was a gamble he wasn't sure he could afford. Jacob swallowed hard, the dust of the desert suddenly tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked back at the chief, the silent warriors, the desperate faces. He knew what he had to do, but the thought of it churned his gut. I need time, Jacob finally stammered, to figure out how to share the water. My well ain't bottomless, and I don't have the means to purify a whole river. The chief's eyes narrowed, suspicion clouding their depths. How much time, white man? Just a day. Let me ride to town. See if I can get some help, some supplies. I swear, it'll come back. With a solution. The chief studied him, his gaze unwavering. Jacob held his breath, trying not to betray the fear that clawed at his insides. He knew the risks. Leaving them here, vulnerable, it was a gamble. But he saw no other way. Finally, the chief nodded slowly. One day. If you are not back by tomorrow's dawn, We will take what we need, and we will not be merciful." He turned and addressed his warriors in their native tongue, the guttural sounds echoing across the plain. Jacob didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. He mounted Bluebell, his movements stiff and deliberate. He gave the chief a curt nod, then turned his horse and rode west, towards the setting sun. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The ride to Harmony Gulch felt longer than it ever had before. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the landscape blurred into a monotonous haze of sagebrush and sand. Jacob pushed Bluebell hard, his mind racing. He needed to convince someone, anyone, to help. But Harmony Gulch, it was a town built on greed and whispers. Trust was a rare commodity. As he rode into town, the familiar sights and sounds seemed alien, tainted by the desperation he had just witnessed. The clatter of the blacksmith's hammer, the raucous laughter spilling from the saloon, the dusty streets teeming with prospectors and drifters, it all felt hollow, meaningless. He dismounted in front of the saloon, the swinging doors creaking a welcome he didn't feel. He tied Bluebell to the hitching post, his hand lingering on her neck, drawing strength from her quiet presence. The saloon was dimly lit and smoky, the air thick with the smells of stale beer and cheap whiskey. A handful of patrons sat at tables, playing cards or nursing drinks. At the far end of the room, behind a polished mahogany bar, stood Harper, the mayor of Harmony Gulch, a man with a smile that never reached his eyes, and a reputation as slick as the pomade in his hair. Jacob walked towards the bar, his boots thudding heavily on the wooden floor. Harper looked up, his smile widening slightly. "Well, well," Harper drawled, his voice oily smooth. "If it isn't Jacob. What brings you to town, friend? Come to try your luck at the poker table?" "I need to talk to you, Harper," Jacob said, his voice low and urgent. "It's about the river." Harper's smile vanished. He glanced around the saloon, then leaned closer to Jacob, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Not here. Come to my office." Jacob followed Harper to a small room at the back of the saloon. The room was sparsely furnished, with a large desk, a couple of chairs, and a heavy safe in the corner. Harper closed the door behind them, then turned to face Jacob, his expression hard. "What about the river?" Harper asked, his eyes narrowed. "The Comanche. They know about the river," Jacob stated, cutting straight to the point. "They say our mining is poisoning it. Their people are sick." Harper scoffed, walking behind his desk and settling into the plush leather chair. "Comanche stories. They'll tell you the moon is made of cheese if it suits them. Don't tell me you believe those savages. I saw them, Harper. I saw their children. They're dying. They're desperate. They came to my place. They want water from my well." Harper's eyes widened, a flicker of greed replacing the dismissive look. "Your well? They know about your well? That changes things." He leaned forward, his voice laced with a newfound interest. "How many of them?" "Enough," Jacob said grimly. "Enough to cause a lot of trouble. They gave me a day to find a solution. If I don't, they're taking the water by force." Harper drummed his fingers on the desk, his mind clearly working. "Force, huh? That's a declaration of war. We can't let them do that, Jacob. We have to protect our interests." "Our interests?" Jacob echoed, his voice rising. "This isn't about interests, Harper. This is about people dying of thirst. This is about a poisoned river. We caused this. We need to fix it. Fix it? How do you propose we do that, Jacob? Shut down the mines? Tell the boys they can't make a living? You know that ain't gonna happen. Harper stood up, his face flushed. Look, I understand you feel bad for those redskins, but we have to think about our own people first. This town depends on those mines. It's our livelihood. And what about their livelihood? Jacob countered, his voice shaking with anger. What about their lives? Are they worth less than our gold? Harper slammed his fist on the desk, making Jacob jump. Don't you dare question my loyalty to this town. I've worked hard to build this place. I won't let a bunch of savages tear it down. He took a step closer to Jacob, his eyes blazing. Here is what we're going to do. We're going to gather the men, arm ourselves, and meet those Comanche at your place. Well, show them what happens when they threaten Harmony Gulch. Jacob stared at Harper, his heart sinking. He knew this was coming. He knew Harper wouldn't see reason. He was being forced to choose. His community, or the desperate people had promised to help. I can't do that, Harper, Jacob said, his voice barely a whisper. I won't fight them. They're not the enemy. Harper's eyes narrowed, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. So, you're choosing them over us? Over your own people? After all we've done for you? I'm choosing what's right, Jacob said, his voice gaining strength. And what's right is helping those who need it, not killing them for wanting to survive. Harper laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Then you've made your choice, Jacob. And you'll have to live with the consequences. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a revolver, the cold steel glinting in the dim light. Now get out of my office. And don't come back. You're no longer welcome in Harmony Gulch. Jacob didn't flinch at the sight of the gun. Had stared down worse barrels in his life. He simply met Harper's gaze, a quiet defiance burning in his eyes. Harmony Gulch ain't worth much if it's built on a lie, Harper. And that river's a lie you've all been living for too long. He turned and walked towards the door, leaving Harper sputtering in his wake. As he stepped back into the smoky haze of the saloon, every eye turned to him. The laughter died, the card games paused. A hush fell over the room, heavy and expectant. Jacob didn't stop. He walked straight to the center of the saloon, climbed onto a rickety table and faced the crowd. He knew he was burning his bridges, maybe even signing his own death warrant. But he couldn't stay silent. Not anymore. Listen up, he shouted, his voice ringing through the room. You all know about the river. You know it's poisoned. You see the water run black. And you know why. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some faces were etched with guilt, others with anger, still others with blank indifference. Harper stormed out of his office, his face red with rage. Get down from there, Jacob. Harper bellowed, waving the revolver. You're drunk. Don't listen to him, folks. Jacob ignored him. The Comanche, he continued, his voice unwavering. They're not savages. They're people. People who are thirsty, whose children are sick. And it's our fault. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the faces in the room. Harper wants to fight them. He wants to protect our interests. But what about their interests? What about their lives? Are we gonna stand by and watch them die, just so we can keep digging for gold? He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the inevitable backlash. I'm not. I'm going to help them. I'm giving them access to my well. It ain't much, but it's enough to keep them alive for now." A collective gasp filled the saloon. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, a chorus of shouts erupted. Accusations flew. "Got you say." Threats were made. Harper raised his gun, aiming it at Jacob. "You're a traitor, Jacob," Harper screamed. "You're siding with the enemy. You'll regret this." Jacob looked down at Harper, his expression calm. "Maybe I will," he said, "but he'll regret it a lot more if I do nothing." He jumped off the table, landing heavily on the wooden floor. He walked towards the door, pushing through the angry crowd. No one dared to stop him. As he stepped out into the dusty street, he knew he was a marked man. Harmony Gulch had turned its back on him. But as he mounted Bluebell and turned her towards home, a strange sense of peace settled over him. He had made his choice, and he would face the consequences, whatever they may be. The desert wind whipped around him, carrying the whispers of the town he left behind. But Jacob pressed on, his heart heavy, but his conscience clear. His ranch, his livelihood, his very life, all were on the line. But some things he knew were worth more than gold. He urged Bluebell into a gallop, the rhythmic pounding of her hooves, a steady drumbeat against the silence. He needed to reach the ranch, warn the chief. He had no illusions about Harper's next move. The man was a cornered animal, and a cornered animal was dangerous. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Shadows lengthened, stretching across the desert like grasping claws. Jacob scanned the horizon, his senses on high alert. He saw nothing, but he felt the weight of eyes on his back, the unspoken threat of pursuit. He arrived at the ranch just as darkness fell. Gunfire cast flickering shadows on the faces of the Comanche warriors, their expressions grim. The chief stood near the well, his gaze fixed on the distant lights of Harmony Gulch. Jacob dismounted, his legs stiff and aching. He approached the chief, his voice low. "They're coming," he said. "Harper's rallied the town. They're gonna try to drive you out." The chief's eyes narrowed, but he showed no surprise. "We expected this," he said, his voice flat. "The white man's greed knows no bounds." "I tried to reason with them," Jacob said, his voice laced with frustration. "I tried to tell them about the river, about the sickness. But they wouldn't listen. All they care about is gold." "Gold is a disease," the chief said, his gaze hardening. "It poisons the land, and it poisons the soul." He turned to his warriors, speaking in their native tongue. They nodded in understanding, their faces stoic. Jacob knew what was coming. A fight, a bloody, senseless fight over water and greed. He had tried to avoid it, but he had failed. Now he had to choose a side. He looked at the chief, at the faces of the warriors, at the children huddled around the fire. He saw their desperation, their quiet dignity. He saw the injustice of their plight. Then he looked towards the distant lights of Harmony Gulch. He saw the greed, the fear, the self-serving ambition that drove the town. He saw the poison that had seeped into their hearts. His choice was made. He walked towards the ranch house, his movements deliberate. He entered the house, the familiar scent of dust and wood filling his nostrils. He went to the gun cabinet, his hand reaching for his rifle. He checked the chamber, the cold steel reassuring in his grasp. He grabbed his ammunition belt, strapping it around his waist. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He stepped back outside, the rifle held firmly in his hands. He walked towards the chief, his eyes unwavering. "I'm with you," Jacob said, his voice clear and strong. "I'll fight with you. This is my land too, and I won't let them take it." The chief looked at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and respect. He nodded slowly, a silent acknowledgement of Jacob's choice. The distant lights of Harmony Gulch grew brighter, drawing closer. The sound of horses' hooves echoed across the plain, growing louder with each passing moment. The attack was coming, and Jacob was ready. He stood beside the chief, his rifle raised, ready to defend the land, and the people he had come to call his own. The die was cast. The battle for the river was about to begin. Jacob stood shoulder to shoulder with the chief, the flickering firelight dancing on their faces, etching them with grim determination. The air crackled with tension, thick with the scent of sage and impending violence. The riders from Harmony Gulch crested the ridge, a ragged line of men armed with rifles and shotguns. Harper led the charge, his face a mask of righteous fury, the revolver still clutched in his hand. "Traitors!" he screamed, his voice echoing across the plain. "We're here to take back what's ours." The Comanche warriors tensed, their bows drawn, arrows notched. Jacob raised his rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger. He knew what Harper wanted. He wanted a fight. He wanted blood. But Jacob wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Not yet. "Hold your fire," Jacob shouted, his voice cutting through the night. He stepped forward, away from the line of warriors, placing himself squarely in the path of the oncoming riders. "This doesn't have to end this way, Harper. There's enough water for everyone. We can share." Harper laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Share? You think we're gonna share with a bunch of savages? You're delusional, Jacob. This is our land, and we're gonna take it back, one way or another." He spurred his horse forward, the other riders following close behind. They were almost upon Jacob, their faces twisted with anger and hatred. He braced himself for the impact, knowing that he was outnumbered, outgunned. He closed his eyes, waiting for the inevitable. Then a war cry shattered the night, a sound so primal, so fierce, that it stopped the riders in their tracks. From the surrounding hills a wave of warriors emerged, their faces painted for battle, their weapons raised high. They were not Comanche. They were a mix of tribes, united by a common cause. And at the head of the charge, riding a magnificent warhorse, was Kai. "Jacob speaks the truth," Kai bellowed, his voice ringing with authority. "The water belongs to all. Harmony Gulch has poisoned the river, and they will not be allowed to steal what little remains." Harper stared in disbelief, his face paling beneath the firelight. He had expected a small band of Comanche, easily overwhelmed. He had not expected this. A united force of tribes, ready to fight for their survival. He had underestimated Jacob. And he had underestimated the power of kindness. The warriors surged forward, their numbers overwhelming the riders from Harmony Gulch. The battle was joined, a chaotic melee of gunfire, arrows, and hand-to-hand combat. Jacob fought alongside the Comanche and the other tribes, his rifle spitting lead, his heart filled with a grim satisfaction. He was no longer alone. He was part of something bigger, something righteous. The tide had turned. The united tribes were pushing back the invaders, driving them towards the ridge. Harper, realizing he was losing, turned his horse and fled, leaving his men to fend for themselves. The remaining riders, demoralized and outnumbered, quickly surrendered. The battle was over. The river was safe. For now. Khalid, wow. For now. The dust settled, revealing a scene of carnage and victory. Wounded men groaned, horses whinnied nervously, and the air hung thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Jacob stood panting, his rifle still hot in his hands, watching as the victorious warriors disarmed the remaining men from Harmony Gulch. Kai approached him, his face grim, but his eyes filled with a quiet respect. "You fought well, Jacob," he said, his voice hoarse. "You have proven yourself a true friend." Jacob nodded, his gaze sweeping over the battlefield. "It didn't have to be this way, Kai," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "Harper brought this on himself. He was blinded by greed." Kai's expression hardened. "Greed is a powerful enemy, Jacob. It can corrupt even the best of men." He paused, then added, "But your compassion is stronger. You have shown these tribes that not all white men are the same. You have given them hope." Jacob looked at the faces of the warriors, their eyes filled with gratitude and trust. He felt a surge of pride, but also a profound sense of responsibility. He had chosen his side. He had stood up for what he believed in. And now, he had to live with the consequences. The Comanche began tending to the wounded, offering them water and comfort. Even the men from Harmony Gulch were treated with respect, their injuries bandaged, their thirst quenched. Jacob watched in silence, marveling at the compassion of these people, even towards their enemies. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, a group of warriors approached Jacob and Kai. They carried Harper, bound and gagged, his face bruised and bloodied. They laid him at Jacob's feet. Kai looked at Jacob, his expression unreadable. "What shall we do with him?" he asked, his voice low. "He has caused much suffering. He deserves to pay." Jacob looked down at Harper, his face contorted with fear and hatred. He felt a surge of anger, a desire for revenge. He could easily order his execution. He could end the threat that Harper posed, once and for all. But then he saw the faces of the wounded men from Harmony Gulch, their eyes filled with apprehension. He saw the faces of the Comanche children, their innocent gazes fixed on the scene. He realized that killing Harper would not bring peace. It would only perpetuate the cycle of violence. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the decision he was about to make. "We will not kill him," he said, his voice clear and firm. "We will let him live. But he will pay for his crimes." Kai nodded slowly, respecting Jacob's decision. He spoke to the warriors in their tongue, relaying Jacob's judgment. The warriors grumbled, but they obeyed. They unbound Harper's gag, but kept him firmly restrained. Jacob knelt beside Harper, his gaze unwavering. "This ends here, Harper," he said, his voice low and hard. "Your greed, your lies, they've poisoned this town and nearly cost lives. It's time the truth came out." He stood, turning to address the men from Harmony Gulch who remained, their faces a mixture of shame and fear. "Harper lied to you. He told you the Comanche were stealing water. He told you they were the cause of the sickness. But he knew the truth. He knew his mining was polluting the river. He knew his greed was killing this land." He pointed to Harper, still kneeling on the ground, defeated. He risked all of your lives for his own profit. As the reason this fight happened. As the reason good men are lying wounded or dead. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Doubts, long suppressed by Harper's charisma and the promise of gold, began to surface. One man, his face lined with grief, stepped forward. "Is it true, Harper? About the mine?" Harper remained silent, his eyes darting nervously. He knew the game was up. Another man, his voice shaking with anger, spoke up. "He told us the Comanche were attacking. He said they were going to steal our land." "He used your fear," Jacob said, his voice ringing with conviction. "He used your greed. He turned you against your neighbors. As a liar and a cheat, and he doesn't deserve to walk free." The crowd turned on Harper, their anger finally unleashed. Accusations flew, fueled by the day's violence and the weight of Harper's deceptions. The remaining townsfolk, those who hadn't participated in the attack, began to arrive, drawn by the commotion. They too joined the chorus of condemnation. Kai signaled to his warriors, who stepped forward and hoisted Harper to his feet. He was led away, his head bowed, his bravado completely gone. The warriors delivered him, not to a grave, but to the stunned residents of Harmony Gulch. "Take him," Jacob called out. "Let him face justice in your town. Let him answer for his crimes." The townsfolk, their anger still simmering, hesitated, then surged forward, taking custody of Harper. They dragged him towards Harmony Gulch, a makeshift prisoner, the cheers of the gathered tribes echoing behind them. The battle for the river was over. The immediate threat was gone. Harper's reign of terror had ended, not with a bullet, but with the truth. The restoration of order, and perhaps even trust, would be a long and arduous process. But for now, a fragile peace had settled over the land. The dust swirled, a red haze clinging to the air long after the townsfolk dragged Harper away. Jacob watched them go, a knot of weariness settling deep in his bones. Victory felt hollow, stained with the blood and the lingering stench of gunpowder. He knew the seeds of distrust had been sown deep, and it would take more than a single act of mercy to heal the wounds. Kai placed a hand on Jacob's shoulder, a gesture of quiet understanding. "The people will decide his fate," he said, his voice low. "But you have given them a chance to choose justice, not just vengeance." Jacob nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He was thinking of Eliza, of her gentle spirit and unwavering belief in the goodness of people. He wondered what she would have thought of the violence, of the choices he had made. "I need to go," Jacob said, his voice barely a whisper. "I need to see her." Kai understood. He simply nodded, releasing Jacob's shoulder. Jacob turned and walked away from the aftermath of the battle, towards the small rise where Eliza was buried. The graveyard was a simple affair, a patch of wind-swept earth dotted with weathered wooden crosses. Eliza's grave was marked by a plain stone, her name and the date of her passing etched into the surface. He knelt before it, the rough fabric of his trousers grating against the dry earth. The setting sun cast long shadows across the graveyard, painting the scene in hues of orange and purple. The air was still, save for the gentle whisper of the wind through the tall grass. He closed his eyes, picturing Eliza's face, her warm smile, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she laughed. "It's done," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "The fighting, at least for now. I tried to do what was right, Eliza. I hope I hope you would have been proud." He opened his eyes, and for a moment he thought he saw her. A fleeting vision, a shimmering of light in the twilight, a faint impression of her smiling face. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving him with a profound sense of peace. He imagined her approval, the soft lilt of her voice saying, "You did good, Jacob. You always do." He reached out and touched the cold stone of her grave, a silent communion between the living and the dead. He knew that Eliza's spirit lived on, not just in his memory, but in the values she had instilled in him. Her kindness, her compassion, her unwavering belief in the power of good, these were the things that had guided him through the darkness. He stood, brushing the dust from his trousers. The sun had almost completely disappeared below the horizon, leaving the sky ablaze with color. He took one last look at Eliza's grave, a promise etched on his face. He would continue to fight for what was right, to honor her memory by living a life of purpose and integrity. He turned and walked away from the graveyard, towards the flickering light of the campfire in the distance. He knew that the challenges ahead would be great, but he was no longer afraid. He had found his purpose, his strength, in the memory of the woman he loved. And he knew, with a certainty that ran deeper than blood, that Eliza would be with him, always. The campfire crackled, spitting embers into the darkening sky. Jacob approached, the faces around the fire etched with weariness and a cautious hope. Kai rose to meet him, his gaze questioning. "The townsfolk have Harper," Jacob said, his voice flat. "They'll decide his fate." Kai nodded, his expression unreadable. "And what of the river?" Jacob looked towards the winding ribbon of poisoned water, shimmering faintly in the moonlight. "That's next," he said, a grim determination hardening his features. The following days were a blur of back-breaking labor. The Comanche, guided by their elders' knowledge of the land, began the painstaking process of cleansing the river. They knew the places where the poison lingered, the deep pools where the mine runoff had settled. They worked tirelessly, diverting the flow, digging trenches, and filtering the water through beds of sand and charcoal. To Jacob's surprise, some of the townsfolk from Harmony Gulch, faces etched with shame and remorse, joined the effort. They came tentatively at first, offering their labor, their tools, their apologies. Old Man Hemlock, the blacksmith, was among the first, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he helped build makeshift filters. Sarah, the saloon owner, brought food and water, her eyes downcast, a silent plea for forgiveness. The work was slow and arduous, but it was a start. Each bucket of contaminated soil removed, each filter painstakingly constructed, felt like a small victory, a step towards healing the land and rebuilding trust. The Comanche shared their knowledge of medicinal plants, showing the townsfolk how to treat the sick and purify the water. Slowly, tentatively, a sense of shared purpose began to emerge, bridging the divide that Harper's greed had created. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Jacob stood by the riverbank, watching the combined efforts of the Comanche and the townsfolk. He saw Kai working side by side with Hemlock, their faces grimy, but their movements coordinated. He saw Sarah tending to a sick child, her touch gentle and reassuring. He saw children from both communities, playing together, their laughter echoing through the valley. A faint smile touched Jacob's lips. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The river was still tainted, the land still scarred, but the seeds of healing had been sown. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, But he also knew that the people of this land, both Comanche and white, were resilient. They had faced hardship and loss before, and they would face it again. But together, they could rebuild. They could heal. They could create a future where greed and hatred no longer held sway. He closed his eyes, breathing in the cool evening air, the scent of pine and damp earth filling his lungs. He could almost hear Eliza's voice, whispering in his ear, "You see, Jacob? People are good, deep down. They just need a chance to show it." He opened his eyes, his gaze fixed on the shimmering river. The water was still murky, but he could see a glimmer of hope in its depths. He knew that the healing process had just begun, but he also knew that it was possible. With hard work, with compassion, with a shared commitment to justice, they could restore the land and rebuild their lives. And in doing so, they would honor the memory of those who had been lost and create a better future for generations to come. The weeks bled into months. The river, slowly but surely, began to run clear again. The combined efforts of the Comanche and the townsfolk, driven by a shared sense of purpose and a growing respect for one another, had started to bear fruit. Patches of green, long withered by the polluted water, began to reappear along the banks. Fish, once absent from the poisoned stream, returned to its depths. Harmony Gulch, once a town divided by fear and greed, was slowly transforming. The scars of the battle remained, visible in the damaged buildings and the lingering grief in people's eyes, but a new spirit was taking hold. The townsfolk, humbled by their mistakes and grateful for the Comanche's help, were learning to live in harmony with their neighbors. They shared their skills, their resources, and their stories, forging bonds that had been unimaginable just months before. Harper, meanwhile, remained in the town jail, awaiting trial. The townsfolk, after much deliberation, had decided to hold him accountable for his actions. The trial was a somber affair, a stark reminder of the damage he had caused. But it was also a testament to the town's commitment to justice, to the belief that even in the Wild West, there was a place for law and order. As the first rays of dawn kissed the horizon, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, Jacob stood beside Kai on a small rise overlooking the valley. Below them, the river flowed, a ribbon of shimmering silver reflecting the morning light. The land, once scarred and barren, was slowly beginning to heal, a testament to the resilience of nature and the power of human cooperation. "It is good," Kai said, his voice low, his eyes fixed on the rising sun. "The land is healing. The people are learning." Jacob nodded, his gaze following the course of the river. "It's not perfect," he said, "but it's a start. There's still a long way to go." "The path is never easy," Kai replied, "but it is the journey that matters. You have shown the people the way, Jacob. You have given them hope." Jacob looked at Kai, a silent understanding passing between them. He saw in Kai's eyes not just respect, but also a deep sense of kinship, a bond forged in the crucible of conflict and shared adversity. They were different men, from different cultures, but they had found common ground in their shared commitment to justice and their love for the land. The sun climbed higher in the sky, bathing the valley in its golden light. The air was filled with the sounds of life, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, the distant murmur of voices. Jacob closed his eyes, breathing in the cool morning air, a sense of peace settling over him. He knew that the future was uncertain, that there would be challenges ahead. But he also knew that the people of this land were resilient, that they were capable of great things when they worked together. He opened his eyes, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The sun was rising, a symbol of hope and new beginnings. And in that moment, Jacob knew that Eliza would have been proud. He had done his best to honor her memory, to live a life of purpose and integrity. And he knew, with a certainty that ran deeper than blood, that her spirit would be with him, always guiding him on his journey. The West remained wild, unforgiving, but touched by a fragile mercy, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit.